Some mistakes don't echo, they arrive quietly, and then they stay forever. The rain had already begun before anyone noticed. Thin silver lines sliding down the tall glass windows of Hallbrook dining room, softening the glow of Manhattan into something distant, almost unreal, as if the world outside had chosen to look away. Inside, everything remained precise, controlled, measured. Silence here was not emptiness, it was discipline. Every movement carried intention, every sound had a place. And at table 12, Richard Holloway sat exactly as he always did, back straight, cuff aligned, the faint gleam of a Swiss watch catching the low amber light. Men like him did not demand attention. They replaced the air with it. Across the room, Emily Carter moved without being seen, not because she lacked presence, but because she understood its cost. Her steps were quiet, deliberate, the rhythm of someone who had learned long ago that invisibility was not weakness, it was control. Her uniform was immaculate, her posture neutral, her gaze lowered just enough to be respectful, never submissive. Around her neck, hidden beneath the collar, a thin silver chain rested against her skin, unseen but never forgotten. It was the only thing she carried from a life she never spoke about. "Water," Richard said, without looking up. Not a request. Never a request. Emily nodded, already pouring, her hands steady despite the quiet weight of his awareness. He noticed everything. Not openly, not kindly, but precisely. 10 minutes passed like choreography. The table was flawless. The glasses untouched by smudge. The silverware aligned with invisible geometry. Emily stepped back, ready to disappear again. And then, something shifted. It was subtle. Almost nothing. Richard's fingers moved across the table, searching for something that should have been there. His wallet. Gone. The silence didn't break. It tightened. Conversations lowered by instinct, not instruction. The room didn't stop. It held its breath. "Where is it?" Richard asked. Calm. Controlled. Dangerous in its quiet. The manager appeared within seconds, smile strained beneath polished professionalism. "Sir, I'm sure this is a misunderstanding. Nothing about this is a misunderstanding." Richard's voice didn't rise. It sharpened. His eyes lifted for the first time, scanning once, calculating, eliminating. Then they stopped. On her. Emily hadn't moved. Not forward. Not back. Just present. "You were the last one here," he said. Not an accusation. A conclusion already forming. The weight of the room shifted toward her. Not loudly, but undeniably. Eyes turned without turning. Judgments formed without words. Emily met his gaze. Just once. Just long enough. There was no fear in it. No apology. Only something quieter. Something that did not fit the role he had already assigned her. Richard stood. Slow. Deliberate. The kind of movement that made space around him without asking. "I don't repeat myself," he said softly. And the softness made it worse. "Where is it?" The rain grew heavier against the glass, a soft percussion against the tension building inside. Emily's fingers tightened slightly at her side. Not enough to show weakness. Just enough to remind herself she was still here. The manager stepped in again, voice lower now, urgent. "We can review the cameras, sir, please." Richard didn't hear him. Or chose not to. His attention had narrowed completely. Focused. Absolute. "You think silence protects you?" he said. And for the first time, there was something beneath the control. Not anger. Not yet. Something closer to insult. Emily didn't answer. She simply stood there, steady, composed, her breathing even, her gaze unchanged. And in that stillness, something began to shift. Not in the room. In him. Because power expected reaction. And she gave him none. The rain outside blurred the city into streaks of light. Inside, the air grew tighter. Smaller. Like something inevitable had already entered the room and was only waiting to be seen. The shift did not happen loudly. It never does. It begins in the smallest fracture, an expectation unmet, a silence that refuses to bend. And then something inside a man like Richard Holloway starts to slip, almost imperceptibly at first, like a perfect structure developing a single invisible crack. "Answer me," he said, the control still there, but thinner. Now, stretched over something less stable. Emily remained exactly where she was. Not frozen. Not resisting. Simply unmoved. Her stillness did not challenge him. It revealed him. Around them, the restaurant had become a theater of restraint. No one spoke. No one intervened. Wealth had its own gravity, and no one in that room had ever learned how to stand against it. The manager tried once more, his voice barely holding together. Sir, please, we will resolve this immediately. Resolve. Richard repeated, a quiet edge cutting into the word. There is nothing to resolve. His eyes never left Emily. There is only truth. He took a step closer, then another. The distance between them disappeared, and with it, the last illusion of distance between accusation and consequence. You think I don't recognize this? He continued, voice low, almost conversational now. The quiet ones, the invisible ones, always the same. Emily's breathing remained steady. If there was fear, it did not surface. If there was anger, it did not speak. She simply looked at him, not up, not down, just level, just present. And that was when it happened. Not premeditated, not calculated. Just a moment, sharp, sudden, irreversible. His hand moved. A single motion. Clean. Controlled. Until it wasn't. The sound did not echo. It didn't need to. It landed, precise and final, cutting through the room like a line no one could cross back over. A glass trembled somewhere in the distance. No one moved. No one breathed. Emily's head turned slightly with the impact, just enough to follow the force. Then it stopped. And slowly, she turned back. Not with defiance. Not with outrage. Just alignment. Her posture reset. Her gaze returned. The same as before. Unbroken. The silence that followed was different now. Not anticipation. Not tension. Something heavier. Something closer to realization. Because power expected collapse. And she did not collapse. Richard's hand remained suspended for a fraction too long, as if even he had not expected the moment to exist once it had passed. Something flickered behind his eyes. Not regret. Not yet. Uncertainty. Emily did not touch her face. Did not step back. Did not speak. Instead, she reached calmly into the pocket of her apron and took out a small, unremarkable phone. The movement was so ordinary it felt misplaced inside the moment. She glanced at the screen once, then lifted it to her ear. No rush. No tremor. Just quiet precision. The call connected almost immediately. Dad, she said softly. The word did not carry across the room, but something about it did. Something invisible. Something that moved faster than sound. She paused, listening. Her eyes never left Richard. I'm at Hallbrook, she continued, her tone unchanged, almost gentle. Yes, table 12. A beat. The rain pressed harder against the glass, as if leaning in. There's a situation, she said. No accusation. No explanation. Just truth. Then she lowered the phone slightly, still connected, still listening. And for the first time since the moment began, Richard Holloway did not move. Because somewhere, in a place deeper than logic, deeper than control, something had just shifted beyond his reach. There are moments when power does not shatter. It pauses. Not because it has been challenged, but because, for the first time, it does not recognize what stands in front of it. Richard Holloway had built his entire life on certainty. Markets responded. People complied. Systems aligned. But now, something in the room had slipped beyond that structure, and it did not announce itself with force. It arrived quietly, in the form of a single word spoken without fear. Dad. The phone remained at Emily's ear, her posture unchanged, her expression composed, as if nothing irreversible had just occurred. Around them, the restaurant had stopped pretending to breathe. Even the smallest movements, the clink of glass, the shift of fabric, had dissolved into stillness. Everyone felt it now. Not the accusation. Not the slap. Something else. Something coming. Yes, Emily said softly into the phone, her voice steady, almost gentle. I understand. A pause. Her eyes did not leave Richard's. No, I'm fine. That word lingered in the space between them, not as reassurance, but as control. Then she lowered the phone, ending the call with a quiet motion that seemed too small to carry consequence. But consequence had already begun. The manager stepped forward, his face pale, something like recognition dawning too late. Miss Carter, he started, voice tight, uncertain now in a way it had never been before. Perhaps we should. The front doors opened. Not loudly, not dramatically, just enough. But the effect was immediate. Subtle. Absolute. A man entered, his presence not announced, not exaggerated. But it moved through the room with the quiet authority of someone who did not need introduction. He did not look around. He did not hesitate. He walked directly toward table 12. And as he moved, something else followed him. Not noise, not attention, but alignment. Staff straightened without thinking. Conversations lowered without instruction. Even the manager stepped back, instinctively, as if making space for something he could not afford to obstruct. The man stopped beside Emily. Not in front. Not behind. Beside. A position that said everything without needing to explain it. His gaze moved once. Over the table, the room, the untouched glass, the tension still hanging in the air, and then it settled on Richard Holloway. Calm. Precise. Unreadable. You raised your hand, he said. Not a question. Not an accusation. Just a statement placed exactly where it belonged. Richard did not answer. For the first time that night, he did not immediately respond. Because recognition had begun to surface, slow and unwelcome, threading its way through certainty. The man reached into his coat and placed something on the table. A simple gesture. A leather wallet. Richard's wallet. Untouched. Unopened. Exactly where it should have been. It was returned to the front desk. The man continued evenly. You dropped it when you stood. Silence followed. Not the kind that waits. The kind that reveals. Richard's eyes flicked briefly to the wallet, then back to the man, and something shifted behind them. Fast, contained, but undeniable. Calculation gave way to realization, and realization to something colder. Emily remained still, her presence unchanged, her dignity intact, untouched by the chaos that had attempted to define her. The man beside her finally spoke again, his voice quieter now, but heavier. You owe my daughter more than an explanation. The word did not echo. It didn't need to, because in that moment, the entire structure of the room rearranged itself. Not visibly, but completely. And Richard Holloway, who had never needed to look up at anyone in his life, found, for the first time, that he could not look away. Power does not disappear when it is challenged. It reveals what it was built on. And in that moment, standing beneath the quiet weight of a truth he could no longer control, Richard Holloway felt something unfamiliar settle into the space around him. Not pressure, not fear, but exposure. The kind that does not come from accusation, but from being seen clearly, completely, without distortion. The wallet lay on the table between them, small, ordinary, and devastating in its simplicity. Proof did not need volume. It needed timing. And this timing was exact. Emily had not moved. Not even when her father stepped beside her. Not even when the truth placed itself quietly in front of the man who had struck her. She remained as she had been from the beginning. Composed, steady, untouched in the only way that mattered. Her dignity had not been defended. It had simply refused to leave. Richard's gaze lingered on the wallet for a fraction longer than necessary. Then it shifted, back to the man, to the presence he now understood too late. There were names in his world that did not require introduction. Names that moved markets without announcement. Names that existed above negotiation. And as recognition completed itself behind his eyes, something in his posture adjusted. Not visibly enough for most, but undeniably for those who knew what to look for. Emily's father did not raise his voice. He did not step forward. He did not demand anything. He simply stood there, occupying space with a certainty that did not need to assert itself. Holbrook doesn't tolerate mistakes like this, he said quietly, his tone even, measured, but carrying something far heavier than anger. Not from staff, and not from guests. The manager lowered his head instantly, as if the words had landed somewhere deeper than protocol. A ripple moved through the room, not chaos. Not panic, just a recalibration. Because the hierarchy had shifted, and everyone felt it. Richard exhaled slowly. It was controlled, practiced, but it did not restore what had already been broken. I was mistaken, he said finally. The words came out clean, precise, but they arrived too late to carry authority. They were no longer a correction. They were an admission. Emily looked at him, not as someone seeking apology, not as someone waiting for justice, just as someone acknowledging that the moment had already passed its point of return. Her voice, when it came, was quiet. You didn't ask, she said. Not accusing, not emotional, just accurate. The simplicity of it carried more weight than anything louder could have. Because it was not about the wallet. It never had been. It was about assumption. About certainty built on position instead of truth. Richard held her gaze for a moment longer than comfort allowed. And in that moment, something else surfaced. Not defeat, not submission, but awareness. The kind that arrives once and does not leave unchanged. Emily's father reached out and picked up the wallet, placing it back into Richard's hand with a calm that felt almost surgical. "You came here for control," he said. "But control without clarity is just noise." The words settled into the silence like something permanent. No one in the room moved. Because this was no longer a scene. It was a correction. Emily finally shifted her weight slightly, the smallest movement of the entire night. Not retreating, not advancing, just stepping out of the moment that had tried to define her. And as she did, the space she left behind did not close. It remained. A quiet reminder that some lines, once crossed, do not need to be redrawn. They simply remain where they were broken. There is a particular kind of silence that follows truth. Not the kind that feels empty, but the kind that settles, layer by layer, until everything unnecessary falls away. And in that space, what remains is not noise, not reaction, but consequence. Richard Holloway stood with the weight of it resting quietly in his hand, the leather of his wallet suddenly heavier than it had ever been before. Not because of what it contained, but because of what it had revealed. Around him, the room had begun to breathe again, slowly, cautiously, as if uncertain whether it was allowed to return to normal. Conversations did not resume. They reassembled, carefully, with awareness, because something had shifted that could not be unseen. Emily had already stepped away from the center of it. Not dramatically, not in retreat, simply moving back into the rhythm she had never truly left. She adjusted a glass at a nearby table, aligned a fork that did not need aligning, her movements precise, quiet, untouched by the moment that had tried, and failed, to define her. There was no tremor in her hands, no urgency in her pace, only continuity. And that continuity carried more weight than any reaction could have. Richard watched her, not openly, not with the sharp calculation he had worn before, but with something else, something slower, less certain. For a man who had built his world on immediate resolution, this distance, this lack of closure, was unfamiliar. "Miss Carter," the manager said carefully, stepping toward her, his voice lowered, almost reverent now. "If you'd like to take the rest of the evening." "No," Emily replied softly, before he could finish. Not dismissive, not abrupt, just decided. She did not look at him when she spoke. Her attention remained on the table she was setting, the quiet geometry of silver and glass. "I'm working." The simplicity of it left no space for argument. Because for her, this had never been about the moment. It was about who she chose to remain within it. Her father observed her for a second longer, something unreadable passing behind his eyes. Not pride, not concern, recognition. Then he turned, his gaze returning briefly to Richard. "We're done here," he said. Not to the room, not even directly to the man in front of him, just into the space itself, as if closing something that no longer required attention. He adjusted his coat slightly, the movement subtle, controlled. "Emily," he added, quieter now. She glanced at him. Just once. A small nod passed between them. Nothing more. Nothing needed. And then he left. No announcement. No lingering. Presence. The door closed behind him with the same quiet it had opened. But the room he left behind was not the same. Richard remained standing for a moment longer than anyone expected. Then slowly, deliberately, he sat. The chair did not scrape. The movement did not falter. But something within it had changed. He reached for his glass, paused, then let his hand fall back to the table. Control, he realized, had never been about force. It had been about understanding. And understanding, once lost, does not return on command. Across the room, Emily finished setting the table. She stepped back, observed it once, then moved on. No hesitation, no reflection, just forward, as if the moment had already been placed exactly where it belonged, behind her. And in the quiet that followed, something lingered. Not humiliation, not victory, something quieter, more precise, the kind of lesson that does not need to be spoken to be remembered, because some mistakes do not echo. They settle, and they stay. The night did not end when the moment passed. It unfolded around it, quietly, deliberately, like a city continuing after a storm no one could fully explain. Holbrook dining room returned to its rhythm, but not to its innocence. The light remained warm. The silver still gleamed. The rain still traced soft lines against the glass, but something beneath it all had shifted, subtle and irreversible. Richard Holloway sat where he had always sat, at table 12, but for the first time, the space did not feel like it belonged entirely to him. The chair was the same, the table unchanged, and yet, something in the air no longer aligned with certainty. He reached for the menu, not to read it, but to hold something familiar. His fingers paused at the edge, then lowered again. Across the room, Emily Carter moved with the same quiet precision she had carried all evening. She did not avoid his table. She did not approach it either. She simply continued, her presence threading through the room without disruption, without hesitation, as if nothing had occurred that required acknowledgement. And that was what unsettled him most. Not defiance, not anger, absence of both. Because for a man accustomed to reaction, her stillness offered nothing to resolve against. The manager lingered at a distance, uncertain, recalibrating his role in a hierarchy that had revealed itself too abruptly. Staff spoke in lower tones, their movements careful, not out of fear, but awareness. Holbrook had always been a place of control. Tonight, it had learned something about its limits. Minutes passed, then more. Time did not rush to close the gap between action and understanding. It stretched it, forced it to be felt. Richard finally stood, not abruptly, not with the authority he had carried earlier. Just a decision. He stepped away from the table, adjusting his jacket with practiced ease, the gesture automatic, but the meaning behind it no longer certain. As he crossed the room, conversations dimmed again, not out of fear this time, but recognition. He stopped a few steps from where Emily stood near the service station, aligning a tray with quiet focus. She sensed him before he spoke. Not by sound, by presence. "Miss Carter," he said. The words were measured, controlled, but stripped of something they had once carried. She turned slightly, not fully, enough to acknowledge. Her expression remained calm, untouched, the same quiet composure that had held the entire night together without effort. For a brief moment, neither spoke. Because there are things language cannot restore once they have been broken. "I misjudged the situation," he said finally. It was precise, correct, and incomplete. Emily regarded him, not with expectation, not with resistance, just with clarity. "Yes," she replied softly. Nothing more. No extension, no acceptance, just truth placed where it belonged. The space between them remained unchanged. Because acknowledgement is not the same as repair. Richard held her gaze a second longer, as if searching for something, permission, perhaps, or resolution, but found neither. And in that absence, something settled. Not defeat, not even regret. Understanding, the kind that arrives without comfort. He nodded once, a small motion, then turned and walked toward the exit. The doors opened. The rain outside had softened, the city lights clearer now, sharper. He stepped into it, without looking back. Inside, Emily returned to her work. The tray aligned, the glasses set, the rhythm resumed, and the room continued, not as it had been, but as something quieter, more aware, because power had spoken loudly that night, and dignity had answered without raising its voice. Morning did not erase what the night had written. It revealed it more clearly. The rain was gone, leaving the glass of Holbrook dining room untouched, polished, almost too clean, as if the world had decided to move forward without acknowledging what had shifted beneath it. But inside, nothing had returned to what it had been. Not completely. Emily Carter arrived before her shift, as she always did. Early, quiet, unnoticed. She moved through the empty room with the same measured rhythm, aligning chairs, adjusting cutlery, restoring order not because it had been broken, but because that was what she did. Precision was not reaction. It was identity. The morning light exposed details the night had softened. The faint mark on her cheek had already faded into something nearly invisible. No one would have noticed. No one would have asked. And she would not have explained. Because some things did not require witnesses to exist. Across the room, the manager watched her for a moment longer than necessary. There was hesitation in his posture now. Not fear. Not discomfort. Something closer to recalibration. "Emily," he said, stepping forward, his voice lower than usual, careful. She turned slightly. "Yes. You don't have to take the floor today," he added. "We can assign you to private service. Or give you time off." The offer lingered between them, heavier than it sounded. Emily shook her head gently. I'm fine, she said. Not defensive, not dismissive, just certain. The manager nodded, but the nod carried something new. Respect, perhaps, or understanding too late. The doors opened. Not dramatically, just enough. Morning guests began to arrive, their conversations softer, their presence lighter, unaware of the precise line that had been crossed hours before. Holbrook resumed its role, but those who had been there the night before moved differently. Slower, more aware, as if something invisible had been added to the space, a memory that did not speak, but remained. And then, just before noon, the doors opened again. This time, the shift was immediate. Not loud, not disruptive, but undeniable. Richard Holloway stepped inside, not with the same force, not with the same certainty, but present, deliberate. The room noticed, not because he demanded it, but because they remembered. He walked toward table 12, the same table, the same position, and yet, everything about the moment felt different. He sat, not rigid, not dominant, just seated. A pause passed before Emily approached. Not summoned, not assigned, simply present when needed. Good morning, sir, she said softly, her tone unchanged from the night before. No hesitation, no tension, just continuity. Richard looked at her, directly this time. No calculation, no distance, just clarity. Good morning, he replied. The words were simple, but they did not carry the same weight they once had, because now they had to stand on something real. A moment passed. Neither rushed it, because both understood something the room did not. This was not a continuation. It was a return. Water, she asked. A quiet echo of the night before. Richard paused, just briefly, then nodded. Yes. As she poured, his eyes remained on her, not searching, not judging, just present, watching not what she did, but how she remained. The same, entirely the same. And for the first time, he understood what that meant. It was not strength that demanded recognition. It was dignity that required none. Emily stepped back, placing the glass exactly where it belonged. No more, no less. And as she turned to leave, the moment settled into place. Not resolved, not erased, but understood. Because some nights do not end when the lights dim. They continue, quietly, in the way people return, in the way they choose to see, and in the rare, irreversible shift where power learns to recognize something it cannot command. There are moments that do not ask to be remembered. They simply remain, not as noise, not as emotion, but as alignment. By midday, Holbrook had fully resumed its rhythm, but it no longer moved the same way. The staff did not speak of the night before, not directly. They did not need to. It lived in the way trays were carried with more care, in the way voices softened half a note sooner, in the way presence itself had become something observed, not assumed. Emily Carter moved through it all with the same quiet precision, her steps unbroken, her gaze composed, her presence unchanged by the attention that now followed her. Not openly, not dramatically, but enough. Enough to know that something had shifted, not in her, but around her. At table 12, Richard Holloway remained longer than usual. Not distracted, not impatient, simply still. The kind of stillness that does not come from control, but from reconsideration. The glass in front of him had long been empty, but he had not asked for more. Not because he forgot, because he was watching something else. Not her movements, not her service, something deeper. The consistency of her presence, the absence of performance, the fact that nothing about her had changed, even after everything had. A man approached his table, quietly, not a server, not staff. A presence that carried familiarity with the room in a different way. He placed a folded document beside Richard's hand. No words, just placement. Then he stepped away. Richard glanced down. A simple envelope, unmarked. He opened it slowly, not out of curiosity, but instinct. Inside, a single sheet. Clean, minimal. The letterhead alone was enough. Holbrook Holdings, Executive Office. His eyes moved across the page once, then stopped. The name at the bottom did not surprise him. It confirmed what had already begun to take shape. Ownership was not always visible. Influence did not always announce itself. And power did not always sit where it appeared to. He folded the paper once more, slower this time, and placed it back inside the envelope. Not hurried, not shaken, just precise. Across the room, Emily adjusted a setting at a newly seated table. A fork slightly misaligned. A glass placed a fraction too far from center. Details most would never notice. Details she always did. And for the first time, Richard understood something he had overlooked not just that night, but perhaps for much longer. Precision was not servitude. It was discipline. It was awareness. It was control, of a kind he had never needed to develop. He stood, the movement quiet, measured, not leaving abruptly, not lingering unnecessarily, just choosing his moment. As he passed the service station, he paused. Not long, not enough to draw attention, just enough. "Miss Carter," he said. She turned slightly. The same as before. Always the same. "Sir." A brief silence followed. Not empty, not awkward, just honest. "Your father," he began, then stopped. Not because he lacked words, because he understood they were no longer the point. Emily held his gaze. Not waiting, not offering, just present. He inclined his head slightly. Not an apology. Not exactly. Something quieter. Something closer to acknowledgement. Then he continued past her and toward the door. Outside, the city had cleared. The rain was gone. The light sharper now, more defined. And inside, Hallbrook remained what it had always been, a place of precision, of silence, of quiet power. But beneath it, something had changed. Not loudly, not visibly, just enough. Because sometimes, the most powerful shift is not when someone rises. It is when someone refuses to lower themselves. And in that refusal, everything else adjusts. Some moments do not end. They settle into the architecture of a place, becoming part of its silence, its rhythm, its memory. And Hallbrook dining room, for all its polished surfaces and disciplined elegance, was not immune to that kind of permanence. Days passed. The rain did not return. The light remained steady, clear, almost indifferent. Guests came and went, unaware that they were stepping into a room that had already been changed in a way no design could restore. Emily Carter continued as she always had. Not elevated, not transformed, simply consistent. Her movements retained the same quiet precision, her presence the same measured calm. She did not carry the night with her. She did not need to. It existed independently, anchored in the memory of those who had witnessed it, and in the subtle adjustments of those who had not. Staff greeted her differently now, not with familiarity, not even with curiosity, but with a quiet respect that did not ask questions. Because whatever had happened that night had already explained itself without explanation. At table 12, the space remained unchanged. But it no longer belonged to certainty. It belonged to awareness. Richard Holloway returned again. Not every day, not predictably, but often enough that the pattern could not be dismissed as coincidence. He no longer entered like a force. He arrived, Saturday, observed, and left. No excess, no display. The man had not lost his power. He had lost something else. The illusion that power alone was enough. On one such afternoon, the room moved as it always did, controlled, deliberate, quiet. Emily approached table 12 without hesitation. "Good afternoon, sir." Her voice remained unchanged. No memory in it. No echo. Just presence. Richard looked up, met her gaze without calculation. "Good afternoon." A pause followed. Not empty. Not searching. Just balanced. "The usual?" she asked. A simple question. The kind that carried no weight, unless you understood what it replaced. He nodded once. "Yes." She turned, her steps measured, her focus already on the next detail, the next alignment, the next quiet correction of a world that functioned on precision. And in that moment, Richard understood something that had taken him a lifetime to miss. Respect was not negotiated. It was observed. It was recognized. It existed before status and remained after it. He reached into his jacket and placed something on the table. Not money, not display, a folded receipt, blank except for a single handwritten line. When Emily returned, she set the glass down as she always did. Exact, centered, unmistakable. Her eyes moved briefly to the paper, then back to him. He did not explain it. He did not gesture. He simply left it there. She picked it up, unfolded it once. The line read, "I should have asked." Nothing more. No apology shaped for performance. No justification. Just truth, placed where it could not be misunderstood. Emily folded the paper again. Calmly. Precisely. She did not smile. She did not respond. She simply placed it back on the table. Exactly aligned with the edge. Then she stepped away, not rejecting it, not accepting it,